the republic will collapse. Their territory becomes huge. And it is really a tough thing for when you have that system to actually create. Now, why does it collapse and why does it do this? Well, we say, oh, well, how does the American government stay afloat? We have systems of government that we have within ourselves. So we have the federal government, which is our national government, that consists of the three branches: the executive, judiciary, and the legislative branch. And then we also have state governments as well, and then local governments. So we're able to have a federal type of a thing that takes place. And so that helps us out. So we have a system in place that allows us to give different ideals down and pass those ideals down and those properties. So that is kind of what we're looking at when we discuss our system of government. Now, the problem in Rome is that they don't have states per se that will actually lead to that. So we see a change in those types of governments. And one big republic can't govern a huge land on its own. So the republic actually becomes very unstable. So they'll give way to a dictator in a lot of ways. So Section 2 talks about this. These are your terms and names: civil war, conflict between two political groups within the same country, which we've experienced in the United States. Julius Caesar, military leader who became the ruler of Rome, the eventual ruler. A triumvirate, a group of three leaders sharing control of the government. Augustus, who will become the ruler of Rome and after the second triumvirate. And then lastly, Pax Romana, a period of peace that lasts over 200 years. So next would be Pax Romana. Okay, or we talked about Pax Romana, the Roman peace. This is actually a term that we'll see a lot throughout history. We'll see something called Pax Mongolia, which is Mongolian peace, and then Pax Americana as well, that talks about American peace. So we'll see that term Pax, used, and it just means peace, a period of peace with this. So that is how we look at that portion of things. Next slide. There we go. So the republic itself is going to eventually collapse. The large wealth, the expanding of the boundaries, it's just too much for one republic that's voting in these people to do. It really is. And it's the reason eventually why Rome will fall. It happens that way. And so when we talk about the fall of Rome, we understand that they just become too big. They actually split into two eventually, and then even then still falter because it's just too much to deal with. So there's a gap that grows between the rich and the poor. And it's not something that is new, that's happened just now in the United States. This is something that has taken place throughout history. The wealth gap is wide. Many of the rich landowners are going to live on these really, really big estates, and they'll have thousands of enslaved people, many of whom they were captured through war and forced to work on the estate. So by 100 BC, enslaved persons within Rome will be about 1/3 of Rome's population itself. Small farmers find it really, really difficult to compete with the large estates that are run by the poor enslaved people. And so many of those farmers who are former soldiers as well. And so a large number of them will sell their land to the wealthy landowners, and they'll become homeless and jobless. We see this today within our own world. And it's not necessarily that it's a bad thing, because now we have specialization of jobs and things like that. But nobody competes with a Taylor Farms in terms of the farming. There are smaller companies, but they usually have their own unique place. And Taylor is big, and they do a great job of things. And we have several big agricultural companies around here, and they do good things. But it's just too hard for a small company to compete with that. And so that usually when there are smaller companies, they specialize in some form of growing with that. So we see it in our own ways, and there is a wealth gap, and we have to understand that wealth gap is there. There's two brothers, one of them being Tiberius, the other Gaius Gracchus. They attempt to help Rome's poor. All right. They propose reforms that are limiting the size of the estates and giving land to the poor. So if you recall from section 1, we talked about tribunes. And those tribunes were the people that helped the plebeians get things in their favor. And so that was one of those things that happened. The size of the estates, limiting the size of the estates and giving land to the poor was one of the things that Gaius and Tiberius Gracchus tried to do. They speak really eloquently about the former soldiers as well. But the two brothers that you see there on the screen, they're obviously depictions of them, they make numerous enemies out of the senators. They feel threatened by by the ideas of giving land to the poor. Both are going to be killed. Okay? Tiberius in 133 BC and Gaius in 121 BC. Okay? And you have a period of civil war that exists within the country after that. Adding to that turmoil, military generals start to seize power for themselves. And their soldiers are loyal to them rather than to the republic itself. So this is really how Julius Caesar comes to power. Generals grab for power as the republic becomes unstable, and they recruit soldiers from the landless poor by promising them land. And those soldiers fight for pay, and they owe their allegiance to the commander itself. And so this is how we see Julius Caesar really coming to power here. So the military leaders gain that power. In 60 BCE, Julius Caesar joins forces with Crassus, who's a wealthy Roman, and Pompey, a popular general. And with their help, Caesar will be elected consul in 59 BC. For the next 10 years, those three men dominate Rome as a triumvirate, or a group of three rulers. Caesar is very strong. He's a brilliant leader, a genius in military strategy. He follows the tradition and serves only 1 year as a consul. He then appoints himself governor of Gaul. And so it's important to understand where that is. So if you look on the map there, you can see Rome there, right in the middle of Italy, right near the Tiberias River. Gaul is up north. It's part of the Roman Empire there. And Caesar crowns himself governor of Gaul. From 58 to 50 BC, Caesar led his legions all throughout that campaign to conquer all of Gaul. And because of this, he shares fully in the hardships of war. He wins the loyalty of all of his men. And so reports get back to Rome that Caesar's doing really well, and it makes him very popular with the people. Pompey, who was a part of that triumvirate, becomes his political rival, and he fears Caesar's ambitions. And in 50 BC, the Senate, at Pompey's kind of will, orders Caesar to disband his legions and return home. Caesar defies the Senate's orders. And on the night of January 10th, 49 BC, he took his army across the Rubicon River, which I think you can see right up there between Gaul and coming into Italy. Let me see if I can get the mouse. If you guys can see that right there, I believe that's the Rubicon. I can't really read it really well, but I think that's where that is. He crosses the Rubicon River into Italy, and he marches swiftly toward Rome. And Pompey flees, and Caesar's troops come in and defeat the armies in Greece, Asia, Spain, and Egypt. So Pompey had a huge army, but Caesar's armies defeat him. And in 46 BCE, Caesar returns to Rome, where he had the support of the army and the masses. And the Senate appoints him dictator that year. In 44 BC, he is named dictator for life. So did you guys read Julius Caesar last year? Somebody?
We read a little bit of it.
You read a little bit of it? So this is at the very beginning. If you recall in the book, there's the title from, I believe it's Marcellus or Flavius, one of the two, where he's, "Wherefore rejoice, what conquest brings he home, what tributaries fall under own, to grace and captive bonds as chariot wheels." And he's like, "You blocks, you stones, you worthless and senseless things." That part there. By the way, I had to read that and memorize that from ninth grade, so that's why I know it. But anyway, there he's saying, you did this for Pompey, and now you're doing it for Caesar. And people don't believe, there's certain people who are not behind Caesar's ideals. They actually believe that he's not a good thing for Rome. But he's appointed dictator for life in 44 BC, meaning he can rule as long as he wants. So, some of Caesar's reforms. He's granted Roman citizenship within the provinces and creates jobs for the poor. That is huge. You could see how that would give him the masses of people to support him. He's trying to create jobs for people who were poor. He expands the Senate, right? Adding his friends and supporters from Italy and other regions in there. And the construction of new buildings are a part of this as well. He starts colonies where people without land could own property and increase the pay for soldiers. And a lot of nobles and senators expressed their concern over Caesar's growing power, his success, and his popularity. And some of those men feel that they are going to lose their influence. There's others who consider Caesar to just straight up be a tyrant. And a number of important senators, led by Marcus Brutus and Gaius Cassius, they plot his assassination. And they're two of his friends at first, but on March 15th, 44 BC, they stab him to death in the Senate chamber. And March 15th is now known as the Ides of March. And so this is the death of Julius Caesar, a painting done by Vincenzo Camuccini. And this is a famous portrait of Caesar dying on the Senate floor, stabbed by the senators there. And as it's quoted in Julius Caesar, the book by Shakespeare, it's "Et tu, Brute," and he says, "You too, Brutus," as the one who was part of this plot to kill him. And so this is where we see kind of the change within the Republic. So after Caesar's death, 3 of his supporters rise to power and they crush the assassins. His 18-year-old son Octavian is one of them. Mark Antony and a politician named Lepidus. They become what is known as the Second Triumvirate, the second group of 3 to rule. As you can probably understand, this isn't going to end well. The triumvirate thing doesn't really work. And so those 3 supporters come together to rule. Their alliance ends, however, with jealousy. Octavian forces Lepidus to retire, and he and Mark Antony become rivals. While leading troops against Rome's enemies in Anatolia, Mark Antony met the queen Cleopatra from Egypt, and he falls in love with her, follows her to Egypt, and there will rule Rome through Egypt with Octavian. Octavian is accusing Antony of plotting to rule Rome from Egypt and eventually make them Egyptian. Excuse me, you have a civil war that will come about in this. Octavian defeats the combined forces of Mark Antony and Cleopatra in a naval battle in the naval battle of Actium in 31 BC. Later, Antony and Cleopatra will commit suicide. And so Octavian comes to power. He restores some aspects of the Republic, but for the most part, he is the unchallenged ruler of Rome. And eventually, he accepts the title of Augustus, or Exalted One. And he keeps the title of Imperator, or Supreme Military Commander, that is there. And Octavian becomes one of the most important rulers throughout Rome. He initiates this idea of Pax Romana, or Roman peace, that lasts for 270 years, or excuse me, 207 years. It's peace that reigns throughout the empire. During this time, Roman Empire includes more than 3 million square miles. The population numbers anywhere between 60 and 80 million people, and 1 million people live within the city of Rome itself. I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but at that point in time, you're talking about a city the size of, I would say, you're probably looking at a city that is the same size as, what am I thinking here? Like a San Francisco? Probably not. San Francisco's probably bigger. San Jose. And so that's a huge city for that time period. The Romans held their government together in part through that, or excuse me, their empire together in part through the government and people who were able to rule, like Octavian, who was a great ruler. But when Augustus, when he dies in 14 CE, the system he set up stays in place and keeps Rome very powerful. But it's only as powerful as that ruler can be. You see agriculture, becoming a huge part of this. Rome has a large trading network as well. 90% of the people were engaged in some semblance of farming. They also have beautiful cities that are created. It glorifies Rome with public buildings, and this is where we get kind of the Roman arches and things like that. Slavery also made a big part in Rome. It made more use of slaves than any other civilization that amounts to about a third of the population. Slaves would work on both farms and city, and so no slave revolts would actually succeed because of the fact that they would be able to be kept in check during this time. So the earliest Romans are also going to worship powerful spirits called Numina. All right. Where am I at here? Divine forces called Numina, and they thought that they resided in everything around them. So you have groups like Lares, okay, who were the guardian spirits of each family. You see deities that are linked to the government, symbols of the state. Among the Roman gods and goddesses are going to be like Jupiter, Juno, Minerva. So it's a very polytheistic style of things. Now, they base it a lot of the times off of the Greeks as well. Classes are very different. The rich, they live extravagantly, while the poor barely have the necessities of life. And to sort of distract from the idea that these people are so poor, they are held in places like the Colosseum. So what do? They call it, what is the name? Oh, bread and circuses. Okay, bread and circuses is the name of the practice that they do. And what does it do? It's meant to give people food for that day and distract from the fact that they are so poor. So they get together in places like the Roman Colosseum, and they have gladiators engaged in combat with animals or each other. So here you start to see, have you guys seen the movie Gladiator with Russell Crowe? I'm assuming you guys have probably seen parts of it at some point. No? Yes? Maybe? Anyway, the movie Gladiator is one that comes to mind as he's a slave and he fights in these gladiators. The whole story is different because technically was a military leader in Rome and then left and got put into slavery, blah, blah, whatever. But this is something that you would see. They would gather in the Colosseum and they would watch these gladiators kind of engaging in combat with different groups of people. And that was something that they talked about and had happen. So it was a crazy kind of a thing that we look at and see with this. So it was definitely something that was different and definitely a part of it. But this happens to be like kind of the ideas behind the god and goddesses. This is the Colosseum that in which they were at. I can't remember exactly the amount of people that they can hold in there, but it was a lot. I think it was like, excuse me, 80,000 people at one point could be held in there. And this is the structure that it looks like. And actually, the incredible thing about the Colosseum is they would even be able to flood the Colosseum. So they would flood it to a certain level, and they would reenact naval battles in there as well. So the construction of this thing is amazing. And if you look here, you see the arches, okay, that exist within that period, and you see a lot of American buildings that are built on the Roman style as well as the Greek style too. But we see the arches and certain things and things like rotundas and those types of things that all come out of Roman architecture in our own government buildings that we have. So a lot of things become borrowed from that group.